Good evening all, and thanks very much for everybody for coming on this very bad evening. My name is David O'Connor and I'm a committee member of the Fire and Safety Division, and on behalf of our chairman, Mr. Dan Fitzgerald, I would like to welcome everybody here this evening for the first of our evening lectures of 2015. Tonight's talk is on the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Construction Regulations 2013 and is a welcome change from our usual fire safety related topics. It goes without saying that health and safety in construction is a very important matter which impacts on all engineers involved in the design and construction of projects. Our speaker this evening is Jim Leahy, who has travelled all the way from Cork. Jim is a chartered civil engineer and also a chartered member of the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. Jim is a director with RPS and has responsibility for health and safety within the RPS organisation. Jim's experience is extensive and includes pharmaceutical, structural, water, wastewater, transport, healthcare, wind farms, and he provides safety consultancy to a variety of clients, including local authorities. Jim is also a lecturer on the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health approved course in conjunction with the Construction Industry Federation and lectures on the role of the PSDP. Jim's presentation this evening will take approximately 45 minutes, and after that there will be a 15 minutes question and answer session. So if anyone has a question, you can leave it until afterwards, if you don't mind. The presentation this evening will be put up on Engineers Ireland website and will also be webcast and can be viewed live or can be downloaded from the Engineers Ireland website at a later stage. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Jim, and we'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks, David, and thanks to the Fire and Safety Division for inviting me to talk. Just to clear one thing, you missed one word there. I'm a technical director of RPS, not a director, just in case my bosses are listening in, okay? So I'm not that high, I'm afraid, not that high at all. I'm going to kick off. The topics David and I agreed we'd try and cover tonight are as follows. We're going to talk about the role of the engineer as PSDP and designer. We're going to look at domestic projects for a little bit because they are obviously very close to our hearts these days. We're going to look at the preliminary safety and health plan, look at the safety file, look in a little way at the duties of contractors and the project supervisor construction stage. We probably haven't time to go into detail in that, but we might look at them and how they relate to the PSDP and designer role. We'll look at the duties of client. I'd like to talk a little bit about relevant approved codes of practice, because these are things that we tend to forget about at times, but we need to be aware of the requirements of them. Some common issues, and these will probably pop up during the talk. And again, at the end, a brief overview of the regulations where they apply to fire safety. So I hope we manage to cover those topics as best we can. We're probably trying to do too much for a 45-minute lecture. I might go a little bit over that, but we'll see what we can do. Engineers construction regulations. Normally engineers are working as or on behalf of clients, designers, the PSDP, the PSCS and contractors. And in all those situations they will find that they are providing advice to clients, particularly on domestic projects now, where if a contractor is appointed to carry out works, he has to advise the client on the need to appoint PSDP and PSCS if they're not there in place. So he needs to have an idea what the construction regulations are about and what they mean to all these parties. And when he's providing this advice or looking at the start of a construction project, he needs to know what is construction and what forms construction. And the best guidance he will get will be the Health and Safety Authority definition of construction work, which was in 2012. And all HSA guidance is available free to download on their website. And the definition of construction is very broad. And we must always remember that we're talking about construction, demolition and maintenance. We've got to be thinking in terms of maintenance and demolition as well as the construction phase. There are also some definitions of construction available in Guidelines for Work in Roads 2008 and the Guide for Homeowners 2013. So it is well worth having a look through these to see what covers you and when you should be looking at work and when you should be applying these particular roles. So I'm going to go through this little slides here now, just a few. pointers as when we should or shouldn't make appointments. And you'll find this or something similar to it in places like the HSA guidance for clients on domestic projects, and you'll find it on the CITB website as well. But this is my version of it. It's the same, and it just breaks it down a little bit for us. You look at the job, or the client is supposed to look at the job, but he may be doing it with his designer, his initial designer. And he looks at it, he's decided he's carrying out construction. If the work is going to work, expected to work, last longer than 30 working days, then the client must appoint a project supervisor design process and a project supervisor construction stage. And these project supervisors must prepare preliminary plans and construction safe plans. And the client must notify the Health and Safety Authority on the AF1 form. This sometimes is carried out by the PSDP, but it is the client's duties. If it's a short job, and one of the examples of this would be maybe a shutdown in a factory where there's a lot of intense work happening over a short period of time. Not going to last longer than 30 working days, but it is estimated that there are going to be 500 person days on the project. Then again, the client must appoint the PSDP and PSCS, and the preliminary plans and construction stage plans must be made, and the HSA must be notified on the AF1. If you decide you're doing a short job, the example I often think about is a gully in a car park. We're just putting a gully into a car park. We should only be there for a short period of time, maybe a day or two. Then we shouldn't have to appoint these things unless there is a particular risk. And we need to know what particular risks are before we can make this decision. So we'll be looking at that in a slide or two. So there could be a particular risk, such as a high voltage cable. In that case, the client must again appoint a PSDP and PSCS, and the preliminary and construction stage plans must be created. But the AF1 does not need to be sent in to the Health and Safety Authority. The HSA don't want to know about these short jobs in this format. You might decide there is no particular risk, it is a short job, and think of these in terms of domestic projects. If you have more than one contractor on site, and more than one contractor will include subcontractors, then the PSDP and PSCS must be appointed. And this brings the PSDP into quite a lot of smaller jobs that we thought we could escape from before. If you don't have any of these things, you have a small job, maybe at home, where you're just getting a tiler into a piece of work, yes, you don't need a PSDP or PSCS, but the client still has to appoint competent contractors. So keep that in mind, and we might look at couple of those cases. We mentioned particular risks, and the particular risks as contained in Schedule 1 of the regulations start with work which puts persons at work at risk of burial under earthfalls, engulfment in swampland, or falling from a height, where the risk is particularly aggravated by the nature of the work. So working at height, or maybe working in a trench, may not be a particular risk, but if there's some other inherent danger there that could cause more trouble for the workers there, then it becomes a particular risk. The next one is work which puts persons at work at risk from chemical or biological substances, constituting a particular danger to the safety and health of such persons, or involving a legal requirement for health monitoring. There'll be some of these, you'll find some of these in pharmaceutical plants, but the big one for us will be asbestos. We need to be very, very careful when we suspect asbestos. The next one is ionizing radiation. We'll have that in places like nuclear density testing on roadways, or maybe testing of wells on pipelines, or maybe in some heavy industries. High voltage. High voltage, guys, is 1,000 volts and upwards. If you go to the ESB, they have a different classification of high voltage. It's a lot bigger. But as I always say, those guys are real men. We designers and PSDPs are wimps. Okay, so 1,000 volts. So if you're looking at a site for prospective work, you need to look up, see what cables are there, or look at the underground services, because you need to determine if there is a particular risk of high voltage cable. Work exposing persons at work to the risk of drowning. You may be working next to a river, you may be working near tanks. Wells, underground earthworks and tunnels, that's heavy civil engineering work. Divers, using divers, it does happen from time to time, Work in caissons with compressed air atmosphere. I haven't come across that here. Work involving the use of explosives. That's obviously going to be a particular risk. Or work involving the assembly or dismantling of heavy prefabricated components. If we're going to be getting a serious crane in to lift things into place, we may constitute or call that a particular risk. Now, the list of particular risks is non-exhaustive. And some people add particular risks to these. There are some local authorities who call working in live traffic a particular risk. And that means it draws them into making the appointments and doing the plans and all that. So there are other risks that may be called particular risks. I would have to leave that to yourself. The client duties, what is a client supposed to do? He must appoint in writing competent and adequately resourced PSDP and PSCS. So he appoints them in writing. These guys must accept their appointment in writing, and he must ensure that they are competent and adequately resourced. In the case of domestic clients, it is up to these guys to prove to the client that they are competent and adequately resourced. He may terminate or change the appointments if necessary to do so. Sometimes there may be need to change the appointment of a PSDP or PSCS. Perhaps there's another contractor coming in who's taking a control. Perhaps somebody isn't doing their job properly. There may be in design and build projects. You do have change of appointments from the original exemplar design PSDP to the design and build contractor. He is supposed to make sure that any contractors and designers that the client employs have adequate competent resources, as well as the PSDP and PSCS. The client is supposed to retain the safety file, and we will look at the safety file in a few minutes, and make it available to people who will need the information from the safety file. These will be people carrying out future construction, demolition and maintenance on the structure or on the project. He passes on the file if the structure is disposed of. It is part of conveyancing. It goes with the property. The client is required to provide information relevant to the project or structure. And this is good for us if we are the PSDP and we want to request that the client carries out further site investigations. We have the power to ask him under the regulations to provide information. The client is also required to cooperate with the project supervisors. And he must notify the Health and Safety Authority using the AF1 form. The next guys we look at are the designers. And the designers must take account of the general principles of prevention. And these general principles of prevention are about eliminating risk, reducing risk, and if there's still a risk there, informing the people that need to know. And they do that through the PSDP, who passes the information to the contractors and the PSCS. The designer must take account of any safety plan or safety file. There are in odd occasions when there is work to be carried out where there's already a construction stage safety plan in place. It does happen from time to time. There is also the safety file. And there should be safety files for jobs which started design in late 1995 when our first construction regulations came into place. And this safety file is the source of information for future construction, demolition and maintenance. The designer must communicate necessary control measures, design assumptions or remaining risks in writing to the PSDP. So we are looking for the particular risks that we mentioned prior to this, and we are looking for design assumptions that a contractor may not obviously see from the drawings or for the other information. The designers must cooperate with the PSDP or PSCS as appropriate, must provide information on the particular risks in writing. They must comply with any direction from the PSDP or PSCS as appropriate. If designers are not doing their job or not seen to do their job under the construction regulations, then the PSDP has the power to issue a direction and can take actions if that direction isn't followed. If you are appointed as a designer to a project, your first question should be, who is the PSDP? If there is no PSDP appointed, then it is your duty under the regulations to advise the client that a PSDP must be appointed. And that's serious for us, because someday something might happen down the line where there's an accident or incident, the client hasn't appointed a PSDP and the first designer or any of the designers hadn't told him. So there could be a number of us in the dock. And it's important then to provide information that is necessary for the PSDP to prepare the safety file. The PSDP duties. He is also required to take account of the general principles of prevention, which is about eliminating risk, reducing risks, and making sure the people who need to know about the remaining risks know about them. He is also supposed to take account of any existing safety file or safety plan. His main role is to coordinate the work of designers, and the language in the regulations is he must organise cooperation between designers on the same project, and so far as is reasonably practicable, ensure coordination of their activities in relation to design health and safety. So if we take on the role of PSDP and there are designers involved, we need to coordinate, and we should have records to show that. The PSDP must provide relevant information to the PSCS for inclusion in the safety plan, which he may get from the client, he may get from designers, he may get from other sources, and he will normally do that through the preliminary health and safety plan. The PSDP is required, since the 2006 regulations came in place, to prepare the safety file. The good news is that the regulations provide a lot of duties for the contractors, designers, and the PSCS to provide information to the PSCS for the safety file. It would be great if everybody provided all the relevant information, and the PSDP might only have to supply the cover for the whole safety file. But life isn't like that. There's a bit of blood and sweat trying to gather this information. The big thing for us as well is, since 2006, the PSDP must coordinate the design of temporary works. And that's a whole training session in itself, I'll be honest. You need to know what is temporary works and how to coordinate it. We'll have a brief look at it. And remember, the PSDP must accept his appointment in writing. A common and accepted method of recording design risk assessment decisions is contained in the book Engineers Ireland, ACI, and the Royal Institute of Architects, The Designing for Safety in Construction. And that's well worth having in your library, and you should be able to get it here, I believe. It's available from Engineers Ireland. And that's a common format. It would be all very nice for us if everybody provided design risk assessments in the same format, so that we wouldn't be reading all sorts of different information. But this is one way of doing it, and there's some excellent advice provided in that book, well worth having in your library. So what is required of the PSDP and designers under the regulations? Well, we must think about buildability. Can something be built safely? Is it easy enough to build? If it's not easy to build, if it's more complex to build, does the contractor know about that so he can price in safety measures? We may need to identify safe methods of construction for unusual or complex designs. The regulations aren't there to stifle creativity. They're there to highlight issues that may not be obvious to a contractor on first look at the drawings and the documents, and that he may need to price in additional safety measures. If the regs were to stifle creativity, we would all be living and working in bungalows. We need to design for maintainability, and the PSDP and the designer need to be looking at things like how we clean things, how we access things, how we carry out repairs, how we replace things, because maintenance is construction. We need to look at structural stability during construction. That's really where the temporary works comes in, the propping systems, the raking systems, and these. So we need to consider these. But it is important that we identify key hazards. And that's very much what the Engineers Ireland and the book I referred to there this minute, that's they talk about identifying the key hazards which we can eliminate or reduce where possible. And very important for us is to identify residual risks. Residual risks for the contractor and the PSCS, and residual risks for the people carrying out maintenance. And that might be done through the safety file. And very important that all should maintain good records. Contractors and the PSCS are very good at maintaining records of method statements and risk assessments and all that. We as designers and PSDP may not be as good as recording decisions we make. And it may be important to us in future to have evidence to show we did what we were supposed to do. Effective PSDP coordination is first, just some bullet points is how one might carry out the role. 1, identify all designers. You cannot coordinate them unless you know who they are. Agree circulation and communication methods. Hi guys, you're designers, I'm the PSDP. We need to cooperate with each other. I need to organise cooperation. This is how I'm going to do it. You may need to review the designs, review the design risk assessments from the designers, identify the risks. The best way of coordinating designers is try and get everybody in the same room. You may need to organise reviews, workshops, tag them along to design meetings, but discuss safety as things go along. A good way of maintaining records is to establish something like a risk register. It could be simply 2 columns. One column is, this is the issue. The second column is what the design team did about it. You could extend that to provide actions for people or where you want to pass on the information, but a risk register is a very good way of tracking information, and it demonstrates coordination. You need to check that the structure of the construction project can be built safely by a competent contractor. Is there enough information for him? Is there additional information he requires? Make sure it can be maintained safely. Again, I repeat, check that key hazards have been identified and addressed. You may need, in your coordination side of things, check that there are issues being dealt with one designer the other designers are not taking into account. For example, maybe a fire escape. Someone puts a fire escape in a certain location and the landscape architect plants a tree right outside it. It's coordination. Somebody needs to maintain something. How do we get at the windows? Oh, we'll bring in a cherry picker. And there's no room for the cherry picker. There's things to be discussed between designers. Note that different levels of projects require different levels of coordination and record keeping. You may need a complex IT system for recording coordination. Or you might just keep your notes in your diary as to what you did. Big jobs, small jobs. The PSCS, his main duties are to develop and update the safety and health plan, which comes from the preliminary safety and health plan. He's required to coordinate the implementation of the construction regulations by contractors, organise cooperation between contractors, and provide information on health and safety on the project. He's supposed to notify the authority before construction commences, and that's the AF2 form. Coordinate the checking of safe working procedures, monitoring compliance, auditing, making sure people carry out auditing. Coordinate arrangements to ensure that workers have a safety awareness card, such as Safe Pass and the CSCS cards. Coordinate measures to restrict entry onto the site, making sure that people can't get on the site who shouldn't be on the site. Coordinate the reporting of accidents to the authority. There are certain accidents that require reporting, and they will be reported by their employers, but the PSCS is to coordinate that reporting. Coordinate the appointment of a site safety representative where there are more than 20 persons on site. Appoint a safety advisor where there are more than 100 workers on site. And very important for us as PSDP, provide all necessary safety file information to the PSDP, which he gathers from the contractors. Again, I don't want to dwell too much on the PSCS role tonight. Contractors must cooperate with the PSCS, providing site-specific information, including relevant extracts from the safety statement. Prior to the 2013 regulations, the contractors had to provide a site-specific safety statement. That's been lessened a little bit in this way. Provide the PSCS with information required for the safety file, all good for the PSDP. Comply with directions of the project supervisors. Again, I mentioned these directions that the project supervisors can issue. They must report accidents that are reportable. They must comply with the site rules and the safety and health plan. They must identify hazards, eliminate the hazards, or reduce the risk. That's their risk assessment. They must facilitate the site safety representative, allow their people to go forward for the role. They must ensure that their workers have Safe Pass and CSCS card, provide workers with site-specific induction, appoint a safety officer where there are more than 20 on site or 30 employed across their company. They must monitor compliance and take corrective action. That's their auditing. And again, if no project supervisors are appointed, advise the client of his or her duties to appoint. Very important, particularly for domestic projects where the client may be unaware of his needs to appoint. I'm going to talk a little bit on codes of practice. There are a certain number of health and safety authority codes of practice, and there's guidelines, but I'll focus on the codes of practice. And they have special legal status. They're the third tier of legislation. Tier number 1 is the Safety and Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005. Tier number 2 are the regulations. Tier number 3 are the codes of practice. They're not compulsory to follow, but they could be used in a court of law. And really, we do have to start following these things. Guidance, there's another level of documents. You really should try and follow these as best you can as well. So we'll look at some of the codes of practice that are relevant. The Underground Services Code of Practice, most of us are familiar with this. And there are just took some extracts from it. And there's a reference to placing services too close together because it could cause trouble for future maintenance or access. And this is the one that we probably all know about. Where possible, designers should obtain up-to-date maps and records of all potentially hazardous underground services in order to allow them consider at the design stage the risk posed by those services, which is why we're always looking for details of underground services at the design stage. And the contractor will be looking for that information later on. That's important for designers, and the PSDP should know about this and should be chasing this. The Overhead Electricity Lines Code of Practice introduced a thing called the hazard zone and the exclusion zone. The hazard zone, you shall not go traffic inside that area without protective measures in place, and you shall not go anywhere near the exclusion zone. And this code of practice said methods to prevent access into the hazard zone is temporary works, and design of this must be coordinated by the PSDP. So add this to your PSDP checklist of things to do. And it does say as well somewhere in that code of practice that the PSDP should ensure that relevant designers include on their drawings the routes of all overhead lines that cross over the site, cross over access routes, are adjacent to site boundaries, identifying overhead lines. And again, I repeat, 1,000 volts and upwards is your particular risk, so be particularly careful of that. You'll know the bigger ones. Confined spaces code of practice, not an awful lot of information on design here, except it does say that designers should, where the elimination of the need for persons to enter a confined space is in practice, so where people have to go into a confined space, ensure that entry and exit can be achieved with as much ease as possible, and make sure that the size of openings are adequate to allow ready passage. That's fair enough, that's sensible talking. These are extracts, there's other information, but this is particular stuff that might be relevant to designers and the PSDP role. The Scaffolding Code of Practice, be wary of this one. And this says that not all scaffolding requires a design. General access scaffolding erected in accordance with the manufacturer's instruction does not require any further design. And you may need to know something about scaffolding to make that determination. I myself am not an expert in scaffolding. I would have to rely on the contractor, and I have to rely on discussions on site to determine what or what doesn't require design. And there is a list of types of scaffolding which do require structural design provided in the Code of Practice, and it's a non-exhaustive list. So normally when I look at a job, I try and identify where there might be scaffolding that requires design, so that when it goes to the construction stage where the PSDP is still involved, I can look at that with the PSCS and the contractor and try and identify if there are further coordination measures required. The Roofer Code of Practice is interesting. Page 19, edge protection in order of effectiveness. And there's about 6 of them there. And the first one would be a full-size parapet. And number 6 is a running line system. So as PSDP, I might often discuss with designers who are putting in one of these running line systems that you have to harness yourself onto and that requires special training and special design. I might ask them, why can't we do a bit better? Go move up towards the parapet. Have a good look at that one. There's guidance and inclusion for the safety file. There's a piece on chemicals. There's technical guidance there on the fall arrest and fall preventions. That's a good thing. Good example of what the client should provide. Things that might be included in the preliminary plan for roof work. Issues about transition from fragile to non-fragile during construction, and there's a reference to homeowners. Now, this was written prior to the 2013 regulations, but that's a very informative document. A lot of these codes of practice are written differently, in different ways. The Structural Anchor Code of Practice This is what I always just call, pardon me for using the trade name, Hilti balls. Okay? And you decide if it is a safety critical situation where the failure of such a bolt in concrete and masonry would cause risk of human injury or death. There are 3 forms to be filled in. This is a very engineering type code of practice, and it is a lot of the structured calculations in this. And in the form number 1 is the designer gathers information necessary for the design of the anchors. The anchor specifier, that could be the designer again, it could be the man from the trade company who picks the actual anchors, and there's a lot of detail required in these forms. And the anchor installer makes sure that he drills the holes correctly, the number of holes, the right depth, and he used the right anchor, and there's a record of all this happening. So the right bolts are chosen. And it says in the code of practice, those first 2 forms must be coordinated by the PSDP. So look up that code of practice if you haven't seen it already. And if you are dealing with some of these bolts down the bottom, be aware that these forms are in use, are required to be in use. What goes in the safety file? The safety required should have information on future construction, demolition and maintenance. So things would go in like the as-built drawings, specifications and bills of quantities where relevant. The general design criteria, information on loading and what floors can take, so that people can do further construction work in safely without having to not trying to find out how it was put together in the first place. Information on materials used, particularly information on any known hazardous materials. O&M manuals, maintenance manuals. Instructions for routine maintenance where it may require particular safety measures. If there are particular places that are difficult to access, that require particular measures, there might be anchor points for hanging onto, there might be places for attaching ladders, or these should be highlighted. Manuals and certain certificates, test certificates might be required. Residual risks, such as fragile materials and any facility to protect those working in close proximity, such as the anchor points. There could be residual risks there that need to be made known to future construction or future maintenance people. Future demolition hazards. It might be prefabbed, it might be post-tension concrete, and it might be put together in a certain way. We may need to provide information as to how it can be taken apart. The safety file can exist in the form of computer files or as paperwork, but you need to determine this early. Find out what the client wants as PSDP so that you're not chasing your tail, gathering a whole rake of information at the end of the job, and most of the contractors are finished and paid off. Domestic clients, it's just a reminder that there's a duty of care placed on the contractor to be fully compliant with health and safety requirements, and ignorance is no defence. So the project supervisors, designers, contractors must demonstrate to the client that they are competent and have allocated or will allocate adequate resources, rather than the non-domestic client, where the client must check the competence and the resources of the people he employs. Just something to, and if you look at the guidance provided from the Health and Safety Authority, which is on the client guidance for the domestic projects, you'll find some good assistance in that. A note here on temporary works is that temporary works may include such matters as trench shoring, scaffolding, propping, working platforms, gangways and access stairs, ladders, etc. And people who make decision on site in respect to these may be deemed to be designers. That's in the 2006 guidance to the construction regulations, which is being altered apparently and updated for the latest regulations. The point here is that PSDP may often get drawn into items of temporary works that he didn't think were temporary works. And there's discussions to what is and what isn't temporary works. A recent one I got drawn into was a 2.5 feet hole that was subsiding, and I was asked where was the PSDP when the temporary works was being designed for the hole. Lifting a cage into lifting a cage of steel. Where was the PSDP when this was being designed? Maybe it's a very large stage cage of steel, so maybe there should be some design involved. But there's a lot of things going on there that are done by guys with common sense that may require further design. There's one particular argument going out there, Harris fencing. You attach a sign to a Harris fence and it's wind loading. Where was the PSDP when the design of the fence went on the Harris loading? There's a discussion actually on the Health and Safety Executive website that I came across while I was preparing for this. And some esteemed designer made the point that if a plastic bag blew against it, it would have the same loading as a small sign. So what are we really getting worked up about if the fence can't take that? But these are things we've dragged into. But this means that really on site the PSDP may need to pay visits to see exactly what's going on. Are there any changes to what would be normally outside use of equipment? So it makes sense that you can use the language that coordination or design coordination is not required for temporary works or permanent works which are assembled in conformity with a general recognised standard configuration, such as the manufacturer specifications or drawings or standard layouts. And that's from the 2006 HSA guidance and the scaffolding code of practice. And another language is that if it can be built in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications or drawings or standard layouts prepared by recognised organisations, then it may not require further design. But these guidelines must be available. And there are HSA inspectors who will visit sites, and if they see scaffolding that they see is non-standard, they will look for the guidance it was designed to. And there's a reference made in their documents to a document TG20, which is from the National Access and Scaffolding Confederation, and that's constantly being updated to provide new standard designs for scaffolding. Again, you may need to ask the question as a PSDP in relation to scaffolding. Be aware of the code of practice, have an idea of what may or may not require design. We use sometimes the permanent and temporary work design certificates. I don't know if anybody here has come across them. They were published originally in the 2006 guidance to the regulations. They are not an absolute requirement. You don't have to use them. It is suggested strongly you use them. I don't know that they actually record coordination, but have a look at them, and if you pass them in front of a designer to sign, then it definitely focuses mind. Then again, in these days now with new building control regulations, he has to sign a lot of other things as well. So, and there are the Engineers Ireland and the ACI alternative certificates as well, which are similar. Slight difference in the signatures required in one of them, but they are fairly similar. What we put in our preliminary safety and health plan in RPS is the general description of the project details, who's the client, PSDP, current designers, who's the PSCS, are anticipated to be. Timescale of the project. We're required by the regulations to put in the plan how long we think the job is going to take and how we came up with that. That's in there. We might put in some safety objectives, some nice things we'd like to see happen on the job. We'll reference the drawings and specifications which are provided elsewhere, provide information on relevant adjoining land uses, site restrictions. There might be site rules the contractor has to know about. He may need to know about local emergency procedures, security arrangements. He might need to know about phasing the works, particularly if there's safety requirements. He might need to know that you can't put the roof on until you get the internal crane in first. This could be a phasing issue. He may need to know about what else is happening on site so he can plan his work around that. Information on known existing services. Information on particular risks. We're back to our particular risks. Information or identification of particular design requirements which we might get from the designers. Anticipated temporary works. You can't coordinate the design of temporary works unless you have some idea at the start what they might be. The scaffolding, and I used a list as provided in the code of practice to identify what I think might occur on site. It may change due to contractor's methodology, but at least I have a starting point. I try and identify the safety critical situations according to the structural anchors code of practice, and again there's a list in the code of practice. Recommendations or specific measures for reducing particular risks. So recommending particular work methods that are recommended for safe construction, where the method may not be obvious to a competent contractor, and you can argue that up, high and low what may or may not be obvious. Features of the design and sequences of assembly that are crucial to safe working. There might be information in relation to structural stability, like propping, that needs to be passed on to the PSCS. Any materials that are specifically requiring particular precautions. We need to specify the location of welfare facilities. That's a requirement of the regulations. Water, electricity and so. If they're not there, tell the contractor so he has to provide his own. a section on the safety file. We are the PSDP, these are the arrangements by which we're going to gather information for the safety file, and this is what we anticipate to be in the safety file. And a section on continuing liaison during the construction stage. These are the procedures, guys. We're the PSDP. We will hold so many meetings and we will discuss temporary works, we will discuss the safety file, we will discuss design changes. And I have an agenda for the site meeting to include PSDP matters to give us a bit of a guidance as what to look for. If you are working on a smaller job, such as the domestic projects, there is a construction safety and health plan which is to be filled out by both the PSDP and the PSCS, contained in the guide for contractors and project supervisors for domestic projects, if you don't want to use the longer list that I provide just in the previous 2 slides. That's worth looking at. So, just coming some fire issues, right, is typical fire safety information for the preliminary safety and health plan. I got into trouble recently because I called it a preliminary health and safety plan. And I was told by some client, did you not know it's a preliminary safety and health plan? This is where I get. Anyway, typical information, fire safety that I might include in a preliminary plan would be adjacent fuel sources that the contractor needs to know that they're before he works. Existing emergency planning, what's he got to tie into with his own emergency plans? Fire permitting requirements. There might be existing fire permitting that he needs to follow up with. Any nature of nearby activities, if the fire's generated fires, or if there's something going on that causes additional fire risks. Any likely continued occupational, who else is going to be around there that, you know, there could be fire risk to them or they might start the fire. And any details of design assumptions or suggested construction process or message which might lead to high fire risk. So these are things we might look for to include in our preliminary plans so the PSCS knows about them. Here's a little example. This is a make-up example, guys. And we're talking about domestic job, right? House extension, single story. Perhaps it's going to take longer than 30 working days because it's, you know, a reasonable house extension. So therefore we need a PSDP and PSCS. Okay, client needs to appoint. The sort of things we might be looking for in the design risk assessment would be issues with access to the rear of the house. There might be difficulties getting in there. Maybe there's an issue with depth of the drainage close to existing foundations. Maintenance requirements. There was a sewer pipe, I came across this myself personally, whereas there's a sewer pipe we can't get at now because the new extension has obstructed it. You know, these are things that might be considered at the design phase. The PSDP coordination in this case would be, look, he met with the designer and the builder. He discussed the issues. He prepared a preliminary safety plan because he had to, the job duration was such it needed. And he prepared a safety file. And what he needed was the as-bills and manuals for the boiler and the windows and other fittings that went in. So we're not talking about a huge amount of work here. Sometimes the smaller jobs can actually take up more work than some of the longer jobs. And you may end up looking at issues that you mightn't look at in the bigger jobs, but they're key issues for that project and maybe for that client. Sort of a bigger job here, just imagine a 2-story industrial development, going to take longer than 30 working days. The PSDP and PSS is required. The risk assessments covered issues like the depth of drainage, where it was going too deep and had to be reduced because it was getting dangerous. There might be scaffolding requirements. There might be scaffolding that's non-standard, and there's temporary works design required. Maintenance issues such as replacing the smoke detectors, getting at the fire dampers, cleaning the windows needed to be considered. Roof maintenance, getting at the gutters. There were some manholes and sumps that may require some access, and issues with door widths, floor loading and equipment. So there was equipment to get in and out for maintenance, and the doors might have to be widened. The PSDP coordination in this case was the PSDP met with the mechanical and electrical, the structural, the architectural designers. He reviewed their risk assessments and gave feedback, and he maintained his own design risk register. He prepared a preliminary safety plan. He prepared a safety file. He used the famous design certificates that we referred to prior to this. And during the construction stage, he coordinated the temporary works through the design team meetings. That's just an example. The other bits and pieces to be done, that's a general synopsis of how the roles might be carried out. Here's one, and let's just say a friend of mine. did this job before Christmas. And this friend decided that his bathroom needed to be upgraded. And his friend's wife has asked to point out this is the old bathroom, this is not the finished bathroom. So the bath was thrown out and the shower was put in. A new shower was put in and the suite of furniture was changed and there was tiling and there was a little bit of electrical work for the shower. It didn't last longer than 30 working days or 500 person days. There wasn't a particular risk, but there was more than one contractor envisaged because they were all subcontractors, tiler, electrician and plumber. And therefore a PSDP was required. Let's just say the PSDP was appointed. The designer's risk assessment covered. The PSDP coordination required to be. Do not ask my friend whether he appointed a PSDP or not, because he may not wish to incriminate himself. But I'm just saying this does come under the regulations.
No one will do it.
True. Maybe. I'll speak to my friend. True, you're right. But yeah, but that's what the regulations are. This is what's required. Okay. So is my contractor wrong by never informing me of the requirement to appoint a PSDP and PSCS? He is. But is this the intent of the regulations? I mean, I know you kind of make fun of it, but it's not the intent of the regulations to catch jobs like this. You know? And this should not really be their focus, and presumably won't be their focus. A brief overview, lads, I'm going on. That's the reference there that I mentioned there earlier on, and it's just there. I'll skip on. Fire design issues under the construction regulations. Fire designers may need to consider the interaction with other, and really in relation to fire design, I think it's coordination with others. Do they often make decisions that affect health and safety for construction? Or are they just designing on compartmentalization and designing on wall thicknesses and requirements for walls? I'll leave that to yourselves. But, you know, if you're putting in fire dampers, someone needs to consider the access for maintenance and for other equipment, because these things need to be tested. You know, smoke exhaust systems, like putting in atria. How's someone going to get up there? These need to be considered at the design level. Maybe there are fire protection materials that require additional structural capabilities. They may need to provide information for the safety file. And the safety file really should probably include things like the fire safety strategy. Someone needs to know how the building was put together and what the safety strategy, the fire strategy was, in case they make changes in future time. The fire escape routes impeded by other design features, just something to watch out for. And maybe ensuring, sometimes, I'm not saying you have to do this, I'm just saying that PSDP might ensure that the requirements of the fire safety certificate are met. I came across it recently, where not all the requirements were put in because the full design coordination did not take place and the designers did not put into place all the requirements of the fire safety cert. Issues to watch out from the construction stage in relation to fire. Potential fire risk during construction. Seems to be a big issue, particularly in the UK, about timber frame buildings and adequate separation from other buildings while there's construction going on. I think there's a case relating to that, and there is some guidance. I'll show you some guidance in a second. Maybe there's some work that requires excessive flames and sparks. Access to the fire brigade to the site and surrounding area. You know, blocking the site and blocking access, particularly in an existing campus. Think about fire protection during renovation works, because there's increased fire risk there at that time. You may have old timbers, you may have other bits of the structure that are flammable. Partial occupation. You know, is the full fire safety in place when some of the building is occupied and the rest of the building is being finished? These are things to consider. And I'm just checking there now. These are some reference documents that I have, that I read a fair bit. They have the Designing for Safety in Construction, bottom right there. That's the book you get here. Well worth having in your library. Should have. There's a CDM book. It's up there, top right on the left. CDM 2007. It's C662. It's a Syria book. You have to buy that from. And that gives good guidance for designers in relation to design and things to look out for. There's the CDM Code of Practice, which is a great guidance, but that's about to be altered because the CDM regulations, which are the UK's construction regulations, are changing in a month or so. We have our own codes of practice and guidance. There's construction skills, HSE, that's the Health and Safety Executive UK, they provide guidance. There's an Association for Project Safety, which is a very good UK site, and even if you go to their website, it tells you information about other websites to look for design safety issues. It's a UK website and organisation, but it's a very good organisation for providing information on design safety issues. There is HSG 168, if you're interested in fire, read this, fire safety in construction. It covers design and it covers contractors, and you can download that off the web. Have a look at that, HS. And then look at the Construction Safety Partnership website. You know, they're tending to publish a lot of good guidance on design issues. So to summarise, finally you say, designers in the PSDP need to consider construction maintenance and demolition risks. They should identify the key hazards and try and eliminate and reduce where possible, and identify residual risks, and use the guidance and codes of practice. And we should all maintain good records of what we did. The time may come where we have to, where we may have to produce these. Thanks very much, guys. Sorry it took so long.
Yeah, I would like to thank Jim for giving an extremely good and clear overview of the safety, health, work, construction regulations, and I'm sure everybody will agree the amount of work that Jim has put into it, which is greatly appreciated. And I will now ask for any questions from the audience.
We have a mic.
Dan will pass around the microphone.
Yes, sir.
Any takers?
Yeah, there's one up here.
Thank you.
No, hoped it was worth the walk.
Just a quick one, in terms of the need for a PSDP, if you're, for example, you have an existing residential building that you're upgrading an existing alarm system, and the work's going to take less than 30 days, you have one contractor on site, and the particular risk, I suppose, is the one in less than 1,000 volts.
If you go back to the, even if you go back to that, use this. Use this one.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a short job,
Yeah.
and you've one contractor and
Yeah.
you're lucky, and you don't have a particular risk, then you don't need the PSDP or PSCS.
No, and it's one contracting firm, not like if you had 3 contractors from.
Watch out for the subcontractor though. That's the problem.
But say you had 3 operatives in the.
3 operatives, if they're working for the contractor, it's the contractor is.
Okay.
If you look up the definition of contractor, someone who supplies labour, but there's a bit more to it than that. But it's not an individual. Isn't
Okay.
a contractor.
Perfect. Okay.
It's the firm itself.
Thanks a million, Jim.
Anyone else? Okay, go on. No bother.
Thank you. Just on that one, I think there is another qualification that if you have non-routine maintenance, it may fall in under the regs as well.
No, it's gone.
Is that gone?
No, you see, no, watch out for that. There used to be, in the 2006 regulations, there was a clause, if you're carrying out routine maintenance, such as the clause actually read something like routine maintenance, cleaning, decorating or repair. It was there to catch the small bits of work you might do the place. So people class routine maintenance. They'd said, oh God, all we're doing is routine maintenance. And what are we doing? Local authorities might, think of it that way. What are you doing? Oh, we have 4 excavators and 3 dumpers. It's just routine maintenance. That was not the intent of it. Yeah. So that clause is actually gone. So you're really back to this now, and you look at your definition of construction.
Very good. My question was in relation to large jobs, and I know you deal with some of the large pharmaceutical jobs. When do you have to appoint a PSDP? If you're looking at something which has master planning and feasibility and concept, I know the regulations sort of say when design starts, but what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, when design starts, that something could be built on. It goes something like that, and this is a common thing. I would think if you are just doing a concept design, and you are not going to, it's just ideas being bandied around, to be honest. But people have different definitions of what is and what isn't preliminary design, what is concept design. It's just when you start getting something firm on paper that it's something is likely to be constructed by, I think you possibly need a PSDP. And I think, actually I was dealing with some planners yesterday morning in Cork, and that question came up, and I think they don't really make huge decisions, but they do decide on layouts of buildings, and there could be safety implications. They could be minor though, minor, and yes, according to the regulations, the PSDP should be appointed at that stage because there's design going on. There is design, but what the PSDP is going to do might be very, very little, but there could be a requirement for it's a grey area, I'll be honest.
Any more? Yes? Yeah.
Quick question on the principles of prevention.
Yes.
The PSDP has to apply principles
Yes.
of prevention. Now, just on a lot of jobs, there can be a number of design specialities.
Yes.
And it's easy for to be seeing how each designer can apply the principles of prevention to their specialist area. I just find myself as working in the PSDP area that applying the principles of prevention when there's so many different elements of design, many of which you wouldn't be familiar with.
Absolutely right.
Exactly what you know, how to fulfill that.
Absolutely right, and that's great. That was one of the slides I took out of the presentation because we were getting too long. The PSDP is not a designer, and even sometimes I look at that duty to, like, designers must they must take into account the general principles of prevention. That's the actual language. Contractors must apply the general principles of prevention. Designers take them into account, which means they must eliminate, reduce, inform, control. Like there's a list of them there by which they must. There's a hierarchy of them. They're heavier than that. The PSDP is not a designer. So in reality, he's not taking into account the principles of prevention. But if he does his job by coordinating and making sure that, and asking questions and identifying risks, but again, and I agree with you, I'm with you on that, you rely on the individual designers to identify the risks. Sometimes you might land in a job and there's a lot of specialist guys on it and everybody says, oh, we're saved, the PSDP is here. He'll know everything about safety. But he may not, but he might be good at coordinating and finding out information and dealing with designers. But they are required to provide information themselves on their particular risks, and they're supposed to take them into account. Even the guidance that says, you look at the 2006 guidance, the first thing the PSDP is supposed to do is identify the risks and coordinate. But he can only do that in reality with the design team. Is that any help to you?
Is there not a reference in the regulations for the PSDP to take into account?
It does.
The principles of prevention?
Absolutely right. It does say that. But how do you do that when he's not a designer? He does his job.
The fact it says that you have to take them into account.
Yes.
Does leave you in a...
It does, but you're still not a designer. I mean, what I can do to you is, let's just say you design something, and I think it's a bit unsafe, and I'm the PSDP. Well, I'll go to you and say, could you not reduce the risk? And you need to explain to me why you can't. And that's me taking into account the general principles of prevention, in my understanding of it.
And
You know?
PSDP, I can do that for areas of design that have good, background in, but I'm reviewing somebody else's design, let's say an electrical, mechanical.
You need to rely on them, yeah. You need to rely on them. We're not experts in every field, and I don't believe we're expected to. I don't believe, and anybody who says he's an expert in every field is kidding himself, I'll be honest. In my opinion. Somebody else? You?
Yes, sorry. I was going to ask, it's a slight development in that. Let's assume it's a case of large roof trusses that are going to be put in. These are big trusses, okay? The design work is done by the timber manufacturer on the spec given in by the designer. He said, I want it to be X, Y, or Z, Y, they go to X number of trusses, very good. But the designer is also the PSDP. And I'm wondering, what's your view on what he should put into his safety file? Should he, for example, include details as to the temporary bracing he's going to ensure that is going to be put up until these things are properly built into place. In other words, when they're hoisted up, they're plopped on down. Should he, at the design stage, say the temporary bracing shall be put in accordance with the British Standard Code or something like that? Or should he simply say nothing about it?
Now, are we confused? Where does, you mentioned the safety file? Is just the is it the preliminary plan, or yes, you're talking about that. If it's a non-standard sort of design and there's something unusual or complex about it, he should be providing some information. And it's assumed methods of construction.
Yes.
And what we're looking for here for these non-standard design and non-standard construction is how did the designer envisage it could be built? That's the important thing. The contractor might do something different. That's the whole problem. Now, I would never say in a preliminary plan, thou shalt do it this way, unless there's an absolute requirement to do it. Just leave it open. But this is how we anticipate it was to be built. And, you know, and that's, you will find contractors asking you from time to time, how did the designer take into account the general principles of prevention? When he designed, he's asking, how am I supposed to build this? This is what our regulations in Ireland and the UK, it's our interpretation of the original directive for Europe is that we as designers and PSDP need to have an understanding how something can be built safely. You might find dealing with people from other countries who may not go into it as deep, they seem to, I've had experience of people from other countries who say, it's not my problem, I'm a designer, it's up to the contractor to build it safely. But our construction regulations are clear that we need to have some idea how to be built safely, and if there's information to be passed on, and people vary on what should be passed on, and you find arguments and discussions, and that's good. Thanks.
I have a question for you, Jim, too. What about, I would say, an unforeseen circumstance, for example, an underground service, and someone shoves a JCB into it and suffers serious injury and or loss of life or something like that, and how are you covered there in terms of the construction regs?
How do you mean?
Well, in terms of, you know, you have comprehensively covered your, your PSDP, and something happens on site.
So the question will you ask yourself is, did we as designers in PSDP identify that risk? Particularly if it's a particular risk.
But if it's unforeseen, like, I mean, not surveyed, not found.
Well, if there wasn't reasonable care taken by everybody to find it, it depends. It's case by case, really. You know, you would expect the contractor to assess what's there, and you'd expect the designer to determine, as far as reasonably practical, what services, and definitely high voltage and other hazardous gas as well. Gas could be something else, to determine what's in place. I mean, you know, often I talk to designers and say, well, how do we actually design underground works if we don't know what services are in the area? But there are other times where you might be putting a pipeline in a road, and you might say, well, the best way of finding out what's out there is we'll do slit trenches everywhere. But it may not be practical. You might have so many slit trenches to do, you might as well throw the pipe in while you're at it. But then there's extra care and attention must be taken at that, and you build it into the contract.
And the second thing is just, how does this tie up with the B-car system, the new B-car system? Or is it kind of, it's not mutually exclusive, but how does it tie in for the assigned certifier role, or how does that work?
I'm glad to say that from personal point of view, that I see it totally running differently. The one thing I would say is the PSDP, in order to coordinate designers, he needs to know who the designers are. And so does the, is it the assigned certifier? The designer certifier needs to determine who the designers are. So I'd be talking to this fella to find out who all these designers are. Now, in relation to that, there could be temporary works issues on site where these are not required to sign certificates, so there might be other designers. So just be cautious that these other guys might exist as well. But I do see it as running separately, and until I'm told differently, I'm hoping to keep it that way.
Thank you, Jim. Just a question for you. For designers, it's project supervisor design stage. But when design starts to go into construction and there's more designers to come on stream, how does that get handled?
project by project, and even when you use the word there, that was the old term, project supervisor design stage, and I know, but like it changed, and because they've now it's project supervisor design process, and process, the word language changed, it reinforced the idea that it goes on through the construction stage, reinforced it, didn't change it, reinforced it, and also included the design of temporary works. So now you have a coordination issue to carry on here. It was easier when you were doing your drawings. You've now got to manage this differently during the design stage. I generally try and do it, like you'll have a lot of the designers you'll be dealing with were the original guys, who you presumably still have contact with. There will be contractors designers who will carry out temporary works design. I generally try and do this through the contractor, through site meetings. So most temporary works designers are very good at providing information, It's those smaller things where there's no real design done. Those are the things that will catch us. But I look, you look for key issues, the bigger issues, the temporary works issues. I try and do it through your site meetings, I suggest. There might be times when you need to speak to these temporary works designers yourself, particularly if they're not playing ball or not coming to you, but your role is coordination, and there's different ways of doing it, It's very easy if you're a PSDP full time on site, that's easier, but it's when you're visiting the job every fortnight, every month, you need to have a system in place to record this coordination. Is that any help to you?
Yeah, is there a requirement for the permanent works designer to sign off on temporary works design certs? Because I know there's one of the certs that has temporary works designer and permanent works designer, but obviously you can have scenarios when the permanent works designer is gone and temporary works designer.
Okay. There's two certs. The original Health and Safety Authority cert, the temporary works, which has the signature of the temporary works designer to say that he's taken into account the general principles of prevention, signed by the permanent works designer to say he's provided this information, and signed by the PSDP to say this all happened, the coordination took place. The other one you're referring to comes from the ACI and Engineers Ireland here, for the temporary works excludes the signature of the permanent works designer. Now, I think in reality, you should, if you're going to be formal about it, you should probably accept that if you've got a permanent works certificate in place first from the permanent works designer. Now, the reason I use them, I would like to see the signature on it, is that if I look at a temporary works design, I get it in from the contractor, I like to check with the permanent works designer to see, is this what he envisaged? Because you'll sometimes find that the temporary works designer may have used the wrong site investigation information, or he might not be, his design may not deal with all the issues. There's a few situations I've had where there was some sheet piling going on, and I took it to the designer. I said, "Look, Brian, have a look at this. Easier for me now when they're all in my office now. It's when they're outside the office, your phone calls yourself." And he said, "Jim, they've no dewatering in there, and this is next to a river. So there's an issue there. So I may not have spotted that." So I like to get them to look whether I get the signature or not. But I think you possibly do need, if you're going to use the certificates, you possibly need the permanent works certificate signed prior to the temporary works there. Yeah, but there's no clear guidance on the use of the certificates, unfortunately. I like the signatures, I'll be honest. Okay, I do. I like the HSA version rather than the other one. But the guys have their good reasons for doing it.
Is there, if you're on the design team, is there any obligation? I would say there's no mention of. If there's no mention of PSDP, are you as a designer obliged to?
Yes.
To say to them,
yes,
who is?
That is part of your design duties.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. And technically we could end up in the dock for not providing that information.
That's fine, okay.
Yeah. There's just to say one thing there, guys. The big fear I have is that someday somebody is going to, let's say, fall off a roof. And if you fall off a roof now, the question is asked, why didn't the employer put in some system to prevent you from falling off the roof, or why did you take care of yourself? But the question may be asked, why didn't the designer and the PSDP provide adequate protection? And there's a case in the UK, I dropped it over the slides there, but I think it's relevant because what we're talking about, where there was an architect fined big bucks because some guy came down a ladder carrying out some snagging works, not maintenance, but he was snagging, and he fell over a low parapet and he died. And the designer was taken to court and was fined big money. So these are the things we need to be cautious about. We need to be considering future construction, demolition and maintenance. It's just a cold thought really at this hour of the night.
If you're a designer providing design to a PSDP who's coordinating several different designers under an overall preliminary health and safety plan, what do you need to provide to the PSDP?
So there's a PSDP and there's a designer to provide information.
Yes.
Okay, you need to provide information, one, on particular risks involved in your design. Sometimes they might be blindingly obvious, but you should provide that in writing. Information on unusual or complex designs, something that may not be obvious to a competent contractor, and maybe, something, maybe phasing issues or structural issues that say, look, I really think the contractor needs to know this. And people vary, as I keep saying, as what should be provided. And I would also like to see residual risks for the contractor, other risks other than particular risks, and residual risks for the safety file. You might decide that, look, there's an access issue up there, and we can't design it out, but it needs to be passed on to the future maintenance people.
Yeah.
So I'd be looking for that kind of information. And the format of the consulting engineer's document, the blue book that I threw up there, their format for design has ticks for all those items. And it's a good way of communicating the information.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to provide, you're not legally required to provide your design risk assessments. Not legally required. You are required to provide the information I just said, but it's a good way of providing information and demonstrating you took into account the general principles of prevention by providing your design risk assessment.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Can you provide all of that information within the design risk assessment?
If you look at their design risk assessment, it is good. It's a tick box for providing information. Or you can provide a separate sheet outlining the minimal information. Like, as a PSDP, I can go to you and ask you to demonstrate how you took into account the general principles of prevention. And a good way of you doing that is to issue me with your design risk assessments.
Yeah.
That's a good way of doing it. But on my understanding is that I can't force you to give me all your design risk assessments in writing. It just helps the whole process. And it is accepted practice now in most places to issue design risk assessments.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, just a quick question.
I'm just conscious of time now. We'll take one more question after this.
Sorry, just in particular in relation to site investigation works, which probably, if it's a short site investigation, don't meet the requirements of the first two on your slide here, but that a particular risk can't be identified until the site investigations have been taken place, particularly the chemical and biological agents, as it might be in a contaminated land site investigation. So where should you err on the side of caution, or is it fair to say that until I undertake these works I am unaware of the particular risk?
I would imagine that if you have good enough reason to anticipate one of those risks, you should probably, as you said, err on the side of caution. Because if you are anticipate now, if you go into a greenfield site and you carry out a site investigation, you've no reason to anticipate something like that, then you don't have to go through the full process. But you'd want to have good grounds for anticipating it, though. It's an excellent question, actually, to be honest. You'd want to have good grounds for anticipating that risk might be there. I mean, what's it going to do, though, if you don't do it, right? If you decide that you say, look, there's a chance of a particular, it's a low chance, and it does exist when you get there. What have you done wrong? Well, you've made a good assumption. It doesn't mean that the contractors can just do it, dig away, with no control measures in place. Just because you don't have a PSDP in place or a PSCS in place doesn't mean the contractors can behave irresponsibly. They still have to comply with the construction regulations. So you would, you might end up just putting another layer of paperwork and organisation that may not be needed, where it's unlikely that they come across the particular risk. That any help?
Yeah. One more question.
Just in particular with wind turbine manufacturers, and you mentioned earlier about them being outside of Britain and Ireland. What type of information, design information, PSDP would you be looking for from them?
There's an excellent question and answer on that. Now, do you know that CDM code of practice I mentioned? There's a good paragraph in that about suppliers becoming designers, or when they become designers. That's the current CDM code of practice. But you really, and there's an FAQ on the HSA website, or there used to be anyway, about suppliers, not in relation to design, but you're looking for information on safe construction, demolition and maintenance. What information do you require for that? Like wind turbine coming in, what information do they need to cast it in? What information do they need for erection? Maintainability issues. Access up and down and safe operations and maintenance. Probably need to delve into that a bit more, to find the details.
You wouldn't be going back a few steps and checking, did they take X or Y into account when they were spacing it or anything like that? Would it be more, would the manuals cover? They typically issue manuals for operations.
Well, are you talking about the spacings, the locations of them?
How they've set up the ergonomics, say, have they applied the principles of eliminate?
Yeah.
Reduce?
Well, the code of practice states, the UK code of practice states that if you're buying something off the shelf, or a supplier is doing so, and this is UK now, this is a UK, they said, you are not a designer and they are not a designer, if I remember. You might, but if they are making something specifically for the job, yes, they become designers. And if you are taking something and modifying something, you then become a designer. But someone's got to pick that. Someone is making decisions in relation to the locations of those turbines, and and they are designers, and that could be more happening here as well. But they will be, a lot of these, if they're making specific turbines for that project, yes, they would be construed as designers, and they have to comply with all legislation. So you might be looking for design risk assessments from them, or a certain amount of information, or some level of discussion anyway.
Right, just to conclude things now, can everybody make sure they fill out the attendance sheet? And I suppose I've now called on Mr. Dan Fitzgerald to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Which will conclude this evening's presentation.
Thanks, David.
Thanks very much.
I was just asked to mention as well, this is on the Engineers Ireland events. I think he's gone now, actually, I think, is he? It's up on the site, the presentation. That's correct, isn't it? We will have.
I believe it's going to be. I think they're going to.
Yeah.
Top and tail it and make me look a bit better looking.
Oh, you're on candid camera anyway. Well, on behalf of the Fire and Safety Division, I'd like to thank Jim for coming up from the Republic of Cork and presenting an excellent and comprehensive presentation on the construction regulations and the PSDP. And I would like you to show your appreciation again in the normal manner. Thank you.